Melissa Ann Hortman was born on May 27, 1970, in Fridley, Minnesota. She became one of the most powerful lawmakers in the state, serving as the 61st Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives and later as DFL leader. On June 14, 2025, at 55 years old, she was shot multiple times inside her own home in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, in what officials called a politically motivated assassination. Her husband, Mark Hortman, was killed beside her. It began shortly after 2 a.m. that night. In Champlin, Minnesota, State Senator John Hoffman and his wife were shot inside their home. Police were alerted and began checking nearby elected officials as a precaution. At around 3:30 a.m., a dark vehicle with flashing emergency lights pulled up outside Melissa Hortman's house. The man inside was 57-year-old Vance Luther Bolter. He was wearing a full police-style uniform, body armor, badge, and equipment. He carried a taser. He looked real. He sounded real. He was not real. Investigators later said he had already prepared a target list of nearly 70 names, mostly Democratic lawmakers and abortion rights advocates. Hortman was on that list. Authorities believe he studied addresses in advance and drove with the intent to kill. Bolter approached the door claiming to be conducting a welfare check. It was the middle of the night. Emergency lights were flashing outside. There was no reason to doubt him. Inside the house were Melissa, her husband Mark, and their golden retriever Gilbert. Around 3:35 a.m., Brooklyn Park police officers, responding to the earlier attack, arrived to check on the home. As they approached, they saw what appeared to be a police vehicle parked outside with lights activated. Then the front door opened. A man dressed as an officer stepped out. Within seconds, he raised a firearm and opened fire on the responding officers. Gunshots echoed in the quiet neighborhood. Officers returned fire. The suspect quickly retreated back into the house. Inside, chaos. Melissa and Mark were shot multiple times. Investigators later confirmed both died at the scene from gunshot wounds. Their dog was also struck and later euthanized due to injuries. Bolter fled out the back, escaping on foot into the darkness. He left behind his vehicle. Inside that vehicle, police found weapons, ammunition, and a written list of targeted individuals. The scale of planning became clear. This was not random. It was deliberate. A massive manhunt began before sunrise. State patrol, local police, federal agents, drones, helicopters, K-9 units. The search spread across rural Minnesota. Communities were told to stay indoors. Lawmakers across the state were placed under protection. On June 15th, nearly 40 hours later, Bolter was located in a wooded area near Sibley County after being spotted by a trail camera and law enforcement drones. He was armed at the time of arrest, but surrendered without gunfire. He was charged at both state and federal levels with murder, attempted murder, stalking, and firearms offenses. Prosecutors indicated some charges could carry the death penalty. Authorities later confirmed he acted alone, but the planning was extensive. He had impersonated law enforcement to gain trust. He moved house to house in the early morning hours. He had already shot another lawmaker before arriving at the Hortman residence. Melissa Hortman had served in the Minnesota House since 2005. She led the chamber as Speaker from 2019 to early 2025 and was known for pushing major legislation on abortion rights, gun safety, clean energy, and paid leave. Just days before her death, she had participated in a special legislative session. On June 27, 2025, Melissa and Mark Hortman lay in state in the Minnesota State Capitol Rotunda. She became the first woman in Minnesota history to receive that honor. The funeral was held at the Basilica of St. Mary in Minneapolis, attended by former President Joe Biden, former Vice President Kamala Harris, Governor Tim Walz, and hundreds of lawmakers from both parties. But the final image of that night remains the same. Flashing lights in a quiet neighborhood, a man in a fake uniform at the door, gunfire at 3:35 a.m., and a planned political assassination carried out inside a family home. Viola Liuzzo was shot twice in the head on the night of March 25, 1965, on a dark stretch of U.S. Highway 80 in Alabama, and died instantly behind the wheel of her car while a 19-year-old black activist sat beside her, covered in her blood and pretending to be dead. She was 39 years old, a mother of 5, and she had just finished helping with the Selma to Montgomery voting rights march when members of the Ku Klux Klan hunted her down. Let me take you into that night step by step. It was March 25, 1965. The historic march had just ended in Montgomery. Thousands had walked for voting rights. Viola, who had driven from Detroit after watching the violence of Bloody Sunday on television, had been volunteering for days, driving activists, carrying supplies, helping at first aid. That evening, she was still working. She was exhausted, but she refused to stop. She believed the fight for civil rights was, in her own words, everybody's fight. Around 7:30 p.m., she got into her 1963 Oldsmobile with Leroy Motone, a young black volunteer. Their job was simple: drive back towards Selma and continue shuttling marchers. The highway between Montgomery and Selma was dark, rural, and isolated. No city lights. No heavy traffic. Just long stretches of road cutting through Lowndes County. What they didn't know was that another car had noticed them. Inside that second car were 4 white men: Collie Leroy Wilkins Jr., William Orville Eaton, Eugene Thomas, and Gary Thomas Rowe. All were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Rowe was secretly an FBI informant, but that fact was hidden from the public at the time. They had been drinking earlier. They were angry about the march, and when they saw a white woman driving with a black man, they locked onto them. The pursuit began quietly. For nearly 20 miles, the Klansmen followed Viola's car. They stayed back at first. Then they closed in. The tension inside Viola's car grew as headlights filled her rearview mirror. Leroy later said she tried to stay calm. At one point, reports say she was singing "We Shall Overcome" while pressing harder on the gas. Then the Klansmen pulled alongside, window to window close enough to see faces. Without warning, shots exploded from the passenger side of the Klan car. Bullets shattered the Oldsmobile's window. 2 rounds struck Viola in the head. She never had a chance to react. She died instantly, her hand still on the steering wheel. The car swerved violently, drifting off the highway and crashing into a ditch and fence. Inside the wreck, Leroy Motone was drenched in her blood, but physically unharmed. He made a split-second decision. He slumped down and pretended to be dead. The Klansmen stopped their car. They got out. They approached the Oldsmobile. One of them shone a light inside. They saw blood everywhere. They believed both were dead. They drove away. Only after they disappeared into the night did Leroy move. He ran into the darkness and flagged down help. Within 24 hours, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced arrests on national television. The 4 men were quickly taken into custody. But the story did not end with justice. 3 of the Klansmen were charged with murder by the state of Alabama, but an all-white jury failed to convict them. The federal government then stepped in, charging them under the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act for conspiracy to violate civil rights. On December 3, 1965, the 3 were found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison, a rare conviction of Klan members in the Deep South at that time. They served only part of their sentences. Gary Thomas Rowe, the FBI informant who had been in the car, testified against the others. He entered witness protection and lived under assumed identities until his death in 1998. Then came another blow. Within hours of the murder, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover began spreading false rumors about Viola. He leaked claims that she was a drug user, that she had abandoned her children, that she was having an affair with Leroy Motone. None of it was true. The autopsy showed no drugs in her system. There was no evidence of misconduct. The smear campaign was designed to protect the FBI from scrutiny because their informant had been present in the killer's car. Her family learned the full truth years later through documents released under the Freedom of Information Act in 1978. Eunice Dwumfour was shot 14 to 15 times at point-blank range on February 1, 2023, at around 7:30 p.m. while sitting inside her white Nissan SUV outside her townhouse in Sayreville, New Jersey, and within seconds of the gunfire, her vehicle rolled nearly 100 feet downhill and crashed into 2 parked cars, her 12-year-old daughter waiting inside the home. calling her phone again and again as it rang with no answer. Now listen carefully, because what happened that night was not random. It was calculated. That evening, Eunice had just returned to the Camelot at Lamar apartment complex in the Parlin section of Sayreville. It was cold. Quiet. A normal weekday. She had recently dropped someone off before heading home. Around 7:20 p.m., she pulled up near her building and remained inside the driver's seat, seatbelt still on. Inside the house, her daughter and family were waiting. They noticed she was taking longer than usual to park. They began calling her phone repeatedly. Outside, a man in a hooded sweatshirt was already in the area. Witnesses later said they saw a thin black male, around 5'10" to 6 feet tall, with braids or dreadlocks, near her SUV. Minutes before the shooting, a suspicious white Hyundai had been seen parked nearby. Surveillance cameras would later confirm both the vehicle and a dark figure walking toward Check Avenue, the exact direction of Eunice's parked SUV. At approximately 7:22 to 7:30 p.m., the ambush began. The shooter approached the driver's side window. No warning. No argument heard. No struggle. Gunfire exploded in rapid succession. Boom, boom, boom over and over. Prosecutors later said 15 rounds were fired at point-blank range through the driver's side window. 8 bullets struck her body. She had nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. She was seat-belted in. Neighbors thought it was fireworks at first. Then they realized it was gunfire. Inside the SUV, Eunice collapsed instantly. The engine was still running. The car, now uncontrolled, began to roll forward down the slight incline of the roadway. It traveled about 100 feet before slamming into 2 parked vehicles. Police arrived after multiple 911 calls. Officers found her inside the SUV, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, the shooter ran between 2 apartment buildings, jumped a fence, and disappeared into nearby woods. Surveillance footage captured him fleeing. That was the beginning of a 4-month manhunt. Investigators recovered surveillance video, analyzed toll booth e-pass data, and traced cell phone records. What they discovered was chilling. A mobile phone had traveled from Virginia to New Jersey on February 1, 2023, arriving in Sayreville shortly before the murder. Minutes after the shooting, that same phone began traveling back toward Virginia. The device belonged to Rashid Ali Bynum. Records showed he had searched online for firearm magazine compatibility days before the killing. He had searched information about Champion's Royal Assembly Church and the Sayreville area. DNA evidence later linked him to a Glock 19 handgun connected to the crime. Phone records also revealed something else. His contact information was saved in Eunice's phone under FCF, an acronym for Fire Congress Fellowship, a religious group affiliated with the church where she served as pastor. Prosecutors described it as a targeted execution. On May 30, 2023, Bynum was arrested in Virginia at 10:45 a.m. without incident. He was extradited to New Jersey and charged with first-degree murder and weapons offenses. The motive was never clearly explained in court. In June 2025, after a 4-week trial and little more than a day of jury deliberation, he was found guilty. On August 18, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison. He must serve 85% of that sentence, more than 63 years, before being eligible for parole. He will not be eligible until 2088, when he would be 94 years old. During sentencing, her daughter's letter was read aloud in court. "Why did you kill my mom? She was my friend and my everything." Bynum showed no reaction. Her sister stood in court and asked him, "You drove how long to kill a woman? What kind of man are you?" Still, no response. The judge called it a horrific and senseless ambush of a helpless and innocent victim.